Years back when I was with my students, I was in a Italian convent school. I was a teacher there. So back there, I was teaching my students about the power of communication, power of emotion, and how it plays a great role in the conversations that we usually have. And I was teaching them this, and I was talking about the emotional balance and emotional controls. So while I was having this conversation, somebody knocked on the door. I opened the door and I saw a peon standing right there. And I asked him what it was, and he said that I wanted to be in the office immediately. So he was giving me a piece of information. I said, okay, I would be back soon, and I locked the door and I began to teach. I continued my work. And then there was a second knock, and this time I was slightly angry, and I opened the door and I looked at the man who was standing there. He was the same peon, and he said, I wanted to be at the office immediately. This time, I told him I would be back definitely. I locked the door, continued my teaching, and as I was continuing, I heard the third knock on the door. This time, I really lost my control. I opened the door wide open and shouted at that man who was standing there. It was the same peon. But I even didn't care to listen to that man, but instead I shouted at him. And I locked the door and I turned toward my kids. And when I was looking at them, they were really, scared, and they were just staring at me. And as they were staring, I remembered what had I done. And I was just teaching the power of communication and how we can use our emotions to strengthen our communication. Then I realized I demonstrated the just opposite of that. And this gave me a big shock. I got out of my classrooms, sat outside, and I decided, that I would never do such a thing in my life. Now, such things occur again because, of course, we are human beings. We tend to make mistakes, and it's necessary to forgive ourselves. So I forgave myself and continued with my teaching. But that day, I realized, the power of unconscious programming, because I was unconsciously controlled when I shouted at this man. And I wanted to know further. I wanted to study further. I wanted to see how that I could not even use the same method that I was teaching my children. So I fell in love with the psychology, and that's when I started learning about psychology. And so so I began to learn more about how we operate, how our past experiences literally guide us towards the particular future that we are building. And it's my mission to help people to become better at their communication. So a lot of us actually suffers in times of communication, because we do know how to talk to people. We do know how to use a particular language, but the problem is we often don't know how to influence people, how to create that effect when we communicate, how to impact your community, your organization through that communication. And it's necessary to impact, because to have an impact on your conversation is like having an influence over that community, and thereby people follow you, they listen to you, and you can lead. So to be a leader, you need to have a good communication etiquettes that really help you out to influence your audience. And here is four pillars that you can use to improve your communication. Number one is be empathetic. So this is, we all know this. We have heard this before. Empathy. Use your empathy. Use your empathy. And I think this is also one of the question in most interviews. They would often ask you the difference between sympathetic and empathetic. So I was asked the same question years back, and I did not know the difference between sympathetic and empathetic back then. Sympathy is just feeling pity on somebody. So you see somebody who is suffering, and you just look at him and say, oh my god, poor person. That is sympathy. But with sympathy, nobody can do anything. He cannot come out of that misery if I sympathize with him. But empathy is literally, it's seeing that pain and feeling that pain. You know, seeing that person who is in trouble and putting yourself in his shoes and trying to picturize the situation. Oh my God. So that's sympathy. Sympathy, when other suffers, you suffer too. You understand that suffering, you understand that pain, and that is empathy. Empathy is really important when it comes to building a relationship with you, whether it's a spouse, your employees, or your workmates. Empathy can build strong relationship. So use your empathy to understand, because in communication, the first thing we need is to understand. I say something and you understand me. Not only you understand my words, but you understand my situation, because you are able to put your legs on my shoe. This is why we have a group of neuron called a mirror neuron. Mirror neuron helps us to understand what the other person is going through. So it helps us to understand the situation, the emotional situation of the other person. And this is why when our partner is in pain, we feel that pain. It's because of that mirror neuron. It helps us to duplicate that feelings, duplicate and replicate those emotional experiences. So use empathy in your communication. Understand the needs of the other person. Not just being judgmental there. Not just simply seeing through your eyes or perceptual filters, or guessing. He must be hungry. That might be the reason. No, empathy is truly being in that situation of that person who is going through that particular situation. And that will in turn help us to understand his needs. Once you understand the needs of that person, next your turn is to help that person to come out of that uncomfortable situation, to come out of that misery, to give exactly what he needs. So use empathy. And the second one is courage. Courage. Now you need to have courage in order to help that person out. Have the courage. You understand the situation. Now you need to have the courage to go to him and ask him what he needs. To stand up with him for his needs. That's courage. Years back, I was walking and I met this woman who said that she was in a big trouble and she wanted some help. Her husband was trapped in a crime, and he was trapped. He was actually a decent man, innocent man. He didn't do anything, and so I started to help her, and because I realized that she was indeed telling the truth, and as I stood with her, and a few of my friends came with her, and we stood by her, and fortunately we were able to save her husband. And the thing that happened was, later, after that, she became a good friend of mine, and now she's a social worker, and wherever there is a problem, she will be there, because she recalls that experience. She had a problem, and when she was having that problem, we were there, we stood by her, and to compensate for that big help that she received back then, she dedicated her life for that purpose, for helping other people who are going through similar situations. And this is the power of standing for someone else who is going through a very difficult, tough situation. That person might be in a difficult situation, but when you stand up for him, you're not only empathizing, but you are being compassionate with him. You are right there. You have shown the courage to help him, that to come out of that problem that he's facing. And that helping mentality is compassion, which is the third pillar of communication. So you need to have this empathy and then courage to go out there and to stand by him and to help him out. If you don't have the courage, no matter how 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 much you want to help, you can't, because you need to have the courage, and courage comes through practicing. And it's kind of an art. It's a discipline that you learn by practicing. So it's like sometimes you stand up for something smaller, and then you gradually start to help people out in a bigger level. So you don't have to go out there and to save a person who is going through a chronic diseases, but you could help out your neighbor who wants to paint his house. So you could go out there and help him to paint that house. So it starts with something smaller. So when you start doing that, when you start just getting out of the comfort zone, you are getting this courage. So have the courage to go out there and to help that person out, and be compassionate. Be compassionate. So this compassion and courage, they are they work together. You need compassion, and then you need courage. So when they are joined together, you will be able to help that person to get out of that misery that he's going through. What would be the result of that? That person will be there with you throughout your life. That person, it's a guarantee. That's the power of true communication. And I wanted to dedicate my life, especially into one for leadership and communication. Because if we can really understand the needs of others and then help that person out, what we're doing is we're building a connection we're building a relationship. And that is what is the foundation of any civilization. You look into the history and you see for yourself this cooperation. You all know Harari in the book of Sapiens. He said this: we, the species, human beings, the only species who conquered the earth. And it's the reason is because we have been gifted with the two most important factors, two important gifts. One is communication. Second is that we are able to connect to one another, cooperate each other. And cooperation starts with this communication and these three pillars, like empathy, compassion, and courage. And when you're compassionate, okay, I want to help him out. Okay, what can I do? Sometimes you might not be able to help him to get out of that problem through financial support, but you can mentally support that person. Most of the children, teenage children, what they need is that the support from their parents, support from their loved ones. So I occasionally hear in the news that a teenage boy or a student committed suicide because he failed in exams. And as I further investigated, studied these cases, one thing that I realized was that it's not just the financial matter. It's not just the failure that they were facing. It's because that they didn't have someone who understand them. Look at that. Even now we are unable to understand what our kids are saying. people call it, this is a generational gap. It's not the generational gap, it's that, we are unable to grow with these kids. That's the problem. We are unable to grow with them. So we are not updating our information, our skills with those kids. So their skills are different. Their skills, their knowledge, and their way of dealing with the things, their communication, it's different. And we are not updating our language. We are not updating our communication to understand our kids. And that's one of the reasons. But if we can really start to use this empathy and being compassion and courage, we can literally help people, your family members, your neighbors, your community members, your people in your organization to have a strong relationship. And out of that strong relationship comes a strong foundation of a community or an organization. And the final pillar of communication is vulnerability. Vulnerability is accepting what the other person is going through, seeing seeing the pain, the misery, the sadness, the anger, the rage that the person is having, because he's a human. I am too a human. We are humans, and we tend to have these emotions. That's why we are humans, right? And vulnerability is showing these true emotions and accepting these vulnerabilities of other people. And not everyone is perfect. In fact, human beings are not perfect at all. But the thing is, we can always strive to become perfect. But that can only be done by understanding the vulnerabilities of other people. So be acceptable toward the vulnerabilities of others and accept your own vulnerabilities. We fail. We make mistakes. We become sad, angry, desperate. Sometimes we get frustrated, confused, not knowing what to do. We might be in chaos, and it's natural. And accept not only your emotions, your feelings, your vulnerabilities, but accept others too. When that person is angry and you accept that anger as a way of communicating his message, now you are, using empathy to understand him, and you are accepting because you are, you are accepting that vulnerability, and you have the courage and you are compassionate to help that person out. Think about the power of, the changes that you can bring to your communication through these 4 pillars of communication. So I encourage you to use the 4 pillars of communication to improve your relationship, to improve your communication. And this is really important. Unless you have these 4 pillars, you may not be able to build a strong foundation of a family, a relationship, a community, or an organization. You need a strong foundation. Start with the communication.